Hello and welcome to another episode of the Solfate podcast, where we interview founders and builders in the Solana ecosystem. Today we had an absolute Chad on the show.
Total Chad.
The HardhatChad. You know the HardhatChad. This is the man, the myth, the legend behind OR, proof of work on proof of stake. Nick, what were you thinking?
I mean, HardhatChad, absolute Chad. Such a great conversations. And like full disclosure, before this episode, I knew almost nothing about OR. I ran into HardhatChad at Breakpoint a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, holy crap. And I was like picking his brain, like, what is this OR thing? How'd you break the chain and like why? And we talked about it. I was like, okay, I'm sold. You got to come on the show. So we got him here. We talked about what the crap is OR? How does it work? It's proof of work mining on Solana, the proof of stake chain. So you're like generating hashes on your computer, just like a proof of work miner. It's all CPU miner. It's like relatively even and equal, all things considered. And then you just like mine rewards and you get the OR token in some fragments, just like mining any other token. It's super fucking cool.
It's pretty sweet. And frankly, like I think we answer in this show one of the questions a lot of us in the ecosystem might have, which is like, hey, this is really cool and we get nerd sniped on this, but what actually can we do with this? Like what's potential utility behind this token? And I think he had some really phenomenal answers. I'm really stoked to see how this evolves over the next little bit. So we should dive into the episode. Before we do that, just want to do a quick shout out to Phantom, the preferred wallet, the Solfate ecosystem. We love partnering with Phantom. Also want to put a quick plug for my dev shop, Unboxed. If you're trying to do anything, build anything on the Solana, chain, or frankly, whether it's off chain, just sort of standard Web 2 stuff, we are here to help. We are sort of expert product developers across, a pretty broad range of stuff. So reach out if you need help. Happy to help. With that, let's get into the show.
Let's go mine. Nothing in this podcast is or should be considered financial advice. Any opinions and thoughts expressed are solely those of the individual. They do not represent the opinions of any entity. Enjoy.
Dude, thank you for joining us. I feel like OR is like almost like a revolution of sorts. And I am so curious to dig into like how, I don't know, like what sparked the idea, what, why you wanted to break the chain so badly, what your plans are, like so many things, right? How do we want to start, Nick? Do we want to ask Hardhat about
what?
Let's start with what is OR and like how does it work? Because it's very, Solana's proof of stake blockchain, and OR is different in a lot of ways than basically anything that I've seen on chain. So like Hardhat, like what is OR and how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, put simply, OR is a proof of work token that anyone can mine. And where it came from was some months back, probably a little over a year ago now or so. I was sitting around with some friends and engineers, and we were looking at how to bridge as much Bitcoin as possible to Solana. I mean, we're big fans of Bitcoin, obviously big fans of Solana. Bitcoin, the chain, is kind of underpowered in certain ways, and Solana complements that really well. And so just the math seemed to go together that if we could get Bitcoin onto Solana, we might be able to bring some value to the world. And there are a few companies that do this, obviously. But we were trying to see if we could resolve some of the issues in the system. And the biggest issue is just that when you bridge BTC to Solana, you have to take on all these extra security assumptions and then counterparty risks. So namely, someone has to custody the BTC and then issue it. And the problem with that is just that when you do that, Bitcoin, the asset, loses kind of its primary sort of appeal, at least in my sense, is that it's no longer the state-free currency. It's a token issued by Coinbase or by BitGo or by some sort of centralized entity, and then there's obviously some like bridge risks. So I couldn't come to conviction that like that was either the right a good business for us to be involved in, or like the right long-term architecture for the industry, is like how many of the 21 million Bitcoin are really going to bridge off of the main chain, and then how deeply integrated is that going to be into like Solana DeFi? There just doesn't seem to be that many incentives for like real, like for people to bridge their BTC off, nor for people to really provide like BTC liquidity in DeFi. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the people on our team had just sort of said as a joke, well, like, what if we rewrote Bitcoin as a smart contract and launched that on Solana? That would get us, quote unquote, Bitcoin on Solana. And it initially was just like a joke. We didn't do anything with it. And we eventually decided not to sort of do anything in this space. And I took like a number of months off of crypto to really like not think about this industry for a little bit. And around January, I was kind of sitting around. I was unemployed at the time and like had a few weeks before I like really needed to get a job. And I was just thinking, well, if I kept thinking about this joke, actually, just like, okay, it'd be like relatively easy to do. It'd be fun, and most likely it will flop, but either way, like it would be a fun project to do. And the Coliseum hackathon was happening at the time, or coming up, and so I decided just to start building it. And while building it, came to learn a bunch of things, but the main one was just that proof of work as it exists on Bitcoin serves primarily like two responsibilities. The first is that like the proof of work helps sort of provide consensus on the network. Like the miners have to find a valid hash and then propose that block out, and all the validators then validate the rules of those blocks. But mining is kind of an integral part of the actual like block proposal system. And then the second is distributing new supply. It's like new BTC supply. The first transaction in every block is the Coinbase transaction that mints some new BTC to the miner who proposed the block. And so it has those two responsibilities: consensus and token distribution. And as I was writing this contract on Solana, just kind of came to realize, well, like Solana is actually providing consensus here through its proof of stake, proof of history mechanisms, and we're operating at the application layer, like the smart contract layer on Solana. And so we don't need to write a consensus mechanism, and this proof of work system doesn't need to sort of offer, like it doesn't need to, provide consensus. And so that actually frees us up to do some more creative things that no other like proof of work token can, because we're operating at that like smart contract layer. And there are a few things we did there, but the primary thing is we realized like, okay, we could actually focus on this mission of like, how do we make the system as accessible as possible, and allow as many people as possible to get involved and to mine, and just like mine on any device, so that we could focus on the distribution problem entirely, like 100% of our efforts on just trying to get as broad of a distribution as possible, and get more people involved. And I mean, ideally in crypto, pulling people in, new users, net new users, onto Solana through mining. And that, like in a nutshell, is kind of where the whole thing started. Is just like trying to create this proof of work token that people could mine and bring some of that like early crypto energy of mining like back to a new generation of crypto users, and have it all happen on Solana. So that's kind of the short version of the story.
That's good. It's good.
Yeah.
So if I were to kind of like distill some of that, it sounds like when you actually started working on the smart contract to basically sort of recreate Bitcoin, if you will, on Solana, you kind of broke the problem down into two parts. It's distribution of new supply, but also consensus. And you sort of realized, oh, consensus is taken care of. Let's focus on distribution and how we can make that as broad as humanly possible. And that's sort of what resulted in OR. And OR obviously isn't the exact design as Bitcoin. It's like, let's take the idea of proof of work, but let's find a way to maybe make it more accessible.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that distribution piece. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a few of the things we tweaked, one of the primary ones was just like the hash function. So Bitcoin uses this hash function SHA-256, which is highly parallelizable, meaning you can optimize it with hardware. And so all of the mining today obviously happens with ASICs, sort of hardware optimized computers that only do SHA-256. It's what they're specially designed to do. And you sort of need like a government's level or utility level, like you need access to cheap energy effectively to even play like the Bitcoin mining game. And so it's kind of, a lot of people are locked out from even competing there. And that's a whole interesting space in and of itself. But yeah, our feeling was, especially early on at the time, was that like mining has been this cultural cornerstone of crypto for a long time, but like neither myself nor anyone that I came into crypto with in my generation had ever done it before. So it's like, could we tweak the system in some way to make it more friendly to folks like ourselves? And yeah, the primary thing that's needed to do that is a new hash function. And so there's kind of a story there, but we found a hash function that was very non-parallelizable. Meaning the like performance gap difference between, say, like a GPU or some hardware optimized device is not that much different, not that much better than just a regular CPU. And
oh, that's super interesting. Hey there, it's Nick. Quick intermission on the episode. If you're enjoying this episode, drop us a review in whatever podcast app you're already listening to, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. It would really, really help us out. We're trying to grow the show, trying to spread the good word of Solana and all the cool things and builders that are here in the ecosystem. You know, and speaking of YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, we publish all of our episodes there. Don't forget to subscribe. It really helps us out too. And yeah, let's go ahead and get back to the episode.
Yeah.
So you're like intentionally making it so no matter what, every individual person is basically on the same playing field. Like the only way they could be at like, I guess like have an advantage is literal physical different devices. So they have one device is roughly equivalent to one other device no matter what.
Yeah. Try to even the playing field as much as we can.
And it's not perfectly even, right? Because like I've actually mined or on different machines. And you even in the CLI have a way to sort of like test how I guess effective your setup is, and they're drastically different between different powered machines. You're more saying that it's just not. It's like a machine with more memory is going to perform better, but it's not. But I'm not going to perform significantly better by like creating an optimized GPU. Specifically for this hash function.
It's kind of like, there's the difference between like a SHA-256 ASIC and a CPU is probably like 7 orders of magnitude or something. Like it's some astronomically large, like you're not even in the same like universe, It's kind of but
that's wild.
For this hash function we chose, there's a variant of it that's used in Zcash, and for that variant, like there are ASICs, and particularly for mining Zcash, and the ASICs are about 100 times more performant per watt, or like 2 orders of magnitude than a CPU, and the variant we're using is even more like it's borrowed some elements from Monero and RandomX, and so we expect that performance gap is even maybe a little bit tighter than like the Zcash variant of the hash function, and so from what we've seen, like there have been some people that have spent a lot of time trying to build optimized GPU clients, and they do get like a little bit more performance per core than a CPU, but it's within the like 2 order magnitude difference range. It's not 7 orders. Yeah.
So given that you now have this proof, well, actually, I wanted to talk about practical application, but I actually
Sure.
think I want to dig into the architecture a little bit more, real fast before we pivot.
Let's nerd out more.
Yeah. Well, it's like I want to delineate between what's on chain and what's off chain, right?
Sure.
Because I think anyone who is a blockchain developer or familiar with the blockchain listening is probably like, well, hold on, none of this is happening on the blockchain. This hash function we're talking about, that clearly can't happen. So it's happening on your machine, and then how are we getting that onto the blockchain, and what's the let's put those pieces together real fast for the listeners, and then we can sort of move on to practical application.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so at a high level, your the mining is all happening off chain. That's right. Like that's in a client on a laptop, a home computer, Raspberry Pi, and so those clients are going through thousands of hashes, basically trying to find what we call difficult hashes. And difficulty here is a measure of like how many leading zeros are on the hash. It's just the more leading zeros that number starts with, the more rare we consider it. And so the way the system works is like a miner will mine for about a minute, like 50, 55 seconds or so. And they look through all those thousands of hashes and they're keeping track of which was the most difficult one they found. And then at the end of that minute, they submit that most difficult hash to the chain. And then the contract on chain is validating the hash that like the inputs were valid, and like the output hash is actually it's a real hash. It's not a fake number. And then if that all comes out to be valid, then the contract will issue some new token to the miner. And the amount that gets issued is sort of a function of that difficulty, how difficult the hash was. So if you're finding more difficult hashes, or in other words, if you have more hash power, you'll be earning more ore per minute. And if you're finding less difficult hashes, you'll earn less ore per minute. But I mean, the basic split there between on-chain and off-chain is that the mining is actually happening off-chain on the clients, and then the validation of the hashes is on-chain.
Got it. So mining here is basically like specific, like discovering hashes, right?
Yeah.
And then you're validating that on.
You're prospecting the ore, and then you're taking it to what stops an individual like mining client from just not submitting low difficulty hashes? Or like, because with Solana transactions, when you submit them, you could do simulation, and if you could check and say like, I'm not getting anything, like I'm not going to pay the transaction fee, just don't submit that transaction. What stops that from happening? So basically people trying to game the system.
It's a good question. There's a lot of this we had to tweak for V2. Because in the V1 system, there was just a minimum difficulty threshold, and we didn't pay out more ore for more difficult hashes. You just had to submit the minimum. You just had to satisfy the difficulty requirement and submit the hash. And so if you had sufficient hash power, it didn't take that long to find a hash of sufficient difficulty, and that was sort of what led to a lot of the spam. Is if you had a moderately powerful computer and just some good software, you would find a lot of these hashes per minute. And so it was just about like, how many could you spam to the chain all at once? And we tweaked a lot of this stuff in the V2 redesign. One, to adjust the payout amount based on the difficulty of those hashes. And then two, there's kind of a timing function to the rewards where based on when you submitted your last hash, there's basically a timing function where for like 55 seconds after that, you're not going to earn anything. Or in other words, if you're spamming like more frequently than a minute, the contract just doesn't pay out to you. And if you're too late, like if you're beyond, a minute and 10 seconds or so, the rewards start to decay. So you sort of maximize your rewards by hitting that like 10-second window around the 1 minute mark. So you're just submitting at a steady cadence of like, what is the most difficult hash I found in the last minute? Let me submit that every minute. And that's helped minimize a lot of the spam a bit, basically, and keep the traffic on like a steady rate.
That's super cool.
I think some people listening know what you're talking about with the spam, but let's maybe dig in there for
congestion.
Let's be honest. This was not just a little bit of spam. This was one of the biggest like tests of the Solana network in the last year, but like maybe in the last few years it was pretty gnarly, like week and a half there or so before some solutions were found.
I think it was we kept the V1 mining open for 2 weeks, basically, before I paused it. And yeah, I don't know. What do you want? There's a little bit that went into that. I didn't know. I think roughly what happened was that there was an issue in like the networking software on Solana.
A little bit.
Yeah. Unrelated to OR. It was already there. And
just sort of unknown because we hadn't gone above a certain amount of volume of transactions, or?
Well, I think some people knew about it, particularly I remember talking to Ben from Temporal, and they had been calling this out for a little while. I think the Anza team at the time was kind of focused on like some potential. They thought there was like an economic solution to some of these problems, but Ben was pretty clear as like the quick client, basically.
Got it. So like it was a known issue. It just probably wasn't the top priority because it wasn't being stressed as much before or as it then was immediately after or.
Yeah. And I had a sense that, okay, there's like some issues, and my basic thought before the launch was like, one, I thought most likely this whole thing was going to flop and no one would care or pay attention. But in the off chance that people did, in the off chance that people did pay attention, my thought was just like, there's that minimum difficulty requirement that if your hashes are of a sufficient difficulty, you can submit the hash and earn some of the token. And I realized like, okay, we're actually giving everyone a bot, basically like a transaction bot to submit transactions to the chain. And so if that min difficulty were low enough and we got just like enough people, maybe like 100 or so, running these bots, that would be like a significant number of transactions. And I thought we would just start to take up more block space effectively. And my thought was, okay, this would be like a nice marketing stunt because it's like, what is this new thing that's taking up, I don't know, a good percentage of the blocks? And it just good conversation started that way. But what I didn't really anticipate was it was going to sort of aggravate that like quick bug and basically lead to like connections, as I understand it, connections between the nodes got dropped, and then reconnecting took a long time. And so in that sort of like downtime period between reconnecting, just transactions wouldn't actually make it to the leader node. And so a lot of people's transactions got dropped, and the spam aggravated that. And then I've sort of been told by like Mert and the Triton guys that there was other stuff happening on chain at the time that's like in addition to ore mining. But I think there was like definitely a little bit of a feedback loop where like the spam started, the issues started to become apparent. People would ask like, why is Solana broken? The answer would be, oh, there's this ore mining thing. And they're like, oh, I need to mine ore. And then there's like, start submitting some more spam.
Vicious loop.
And yeah.
For what it's worth, that's how I started mining ore. I was unsuccessful due to the network problem, James. Due to the network congestion. But like, I was like, oh, this look like the marketing stunt worked, because I was like, oh, I should go try this. And then because of the state of the network, I was unsuccessful at it, and like didn't successfully mine any ore until V2. yeah, that's funny that I like I'm evidence of that feedback loop apparently.
Yeah. It worked out from like a marketing standpoint for sure. We got, I think a lot of attention from that, and like a lot of the communities formed out of those few weeks, as well as like the Twitter account followers and everything else. So I think in the end it worked out well from a project perspective. But the reason I eventually made the decision to pause was basically what you mentioned there. Is like the goal was about like creating the system that everyone could participate in and earn some of the token. And because of the issues, that clearly was not happening. The only people that were actually earning any of the token were more sophisticated actors who knew how to get their transactions landed, and everyone else was basically earning nothing. And so I sort of made the call of, well, like this is sort of existential. Like the mission that we're trying to achieve is not being achieved because of these issues, and so we need to pause to fix them, and then we'll relaunch. And we had to hard fork actually to do the V2 because I froze the V1 contract before launch. So hard forks are never fun, but we made it through, and V2 is live now. So yeah.
Nice.
Does it use the same token under the hood, or is it a different token, just separate program?
No, it's a different token. That's that's why that was the hard fork. Was because the mint authority on the V1 token was owned by that frozen contract. And so really wasn't able to, there was no way to recover that. But what we did was there's an upgrade function where if you owned any of the V1 token, you can burn that and then mint the V2 token one for one, basically.
Gotcha.
And that
how are you able to burn the V1 token if the authority? Oh, was it a different burn authority then?
Yeah, anyone can burn.
Users can always burn their own tokens.
Oh, got it. Got it. Okay, they burn their own token. I was still thinking from the standpoint of a contract.
We still handle it in the contract. User burns it. The contract checks if they signed it, and then you can issue the new ones.
Yeah. That checks out.
God, do you even dev, James? God,
dude, not recently, sir.
That's fair.
No, that's way cool. I did buy ore in like V1 ore, so I did go through that upgrade path, and it worked just fine. So that was great. What were some of the changes between V1 and V2? You've alluded to some of them already, but maybe we just tick off some of those boxes.
Yeah. So the big ones were changing the reward calculus. So paying out the more ore for more difficult hashes, and tweaking the adding that timing function. So those two things together kind of tweaked the incentives, where rather than submitting as many hashes as you can, as quickly as you can, miners maximize rewards by submitting the most difficult hash they can every minute. And so the tweaking of those incentives was kind of just like the big thing that we spent the most time working out. And then the other thing that we added was basically a supply cap. So the V1 token had, the way the contract was written was there was no limit on the overall number of tokens, and it would have just kind of gone on forever. In the V2, we added a supply cap we just kind of borrowed the Bitcoin number of 21 million, and that's where the supply cap is currently set. And so the contract kind of adjusts the reward rate to maintain this average 1 ore per minute inflation. So no matter how many people are mining, no matter how much hash power they have, we keep this steady linear supply growth. And that's just capped at 21 million. And at that rate, we can calculate out, okay, it'll take roughly a little under 40 years, 40 years to reach the total supply. There's been a lot of feedback that that's too large, to the FDV.
People want more tokens right now. That's
yeah. The FDV is kind of absurdly high. And so that gives some people sticker shock. And so we've been considering some like alternative mechanisms of like monetary policy, I guess you could say. Of one that we're recently debating in the Discord right now is like, should we set the max supply somewhere much lower, maybe like 1 million, 2 million, something like that, and use like futarchy to decide whether or not to increase it further. And and so I think we'll run a proposal for this at some point in the near future. But yeah, there's kind of the or Discord is full of debates over how to manage the monetary policy of the token. It's been fun to debate those.
My gut tells me that like generally there are three types of participants in crypto, and obviously I'm like arbitrarily assigning buckets here. there could be more or less, that kind of thing. But like the big ones that I see is there's sort of like nerds similar to maybe us here, who is just like, this OR thing, for example, is interesting because it's just like new and like an innovative way to work through stuff, and that alone is enough of a draw, right? It's just like, this is cool, right? Then there's sort of speculators, right, where it's like, well, this might be valuable, so I'm going to get in now so that I can profit from it. And then lastly, there's maybe people who actually see like the utility of a thing. And so I'm curious what you think the breakdown of OR participants is among those buckets. Like how much of the OR community is just nerds who are like, I don't actually care what this gets used for. This is just fun and innovative and interesting, versus people who are like, I just want to make money, like get that OR so we can sell it later, versus people who are like, I think there's some really cool use cases for this and I want to be involved in discovering those.
Yeah. It is interesting. There is different factions, I think, to the community that we've seen sort of pop up, particularly in the Discord is like where I think a lot of these debates happen. There's certainly a section that or a faction that is just kind of long-term, like very curious about the project, thought it was interesting. They know not everything is worked out, and they seem to take just like a buy and hold mentality, and they're just like, okay, wherever this goes, it'll be fun, and we're just here for the journey. And then there's a different faction of users who are much more sort of short-term oriented, and have all sorts of demands for what they think will pump the price. And I think for sure that second group, the short-term people, are louder. I don't know if it's hard to get exact numbers. My sense is there are actually fewer of them, but they're just louder. And so a lot of they tend to like drive a lot more of the discussion. But at the same time, like they often have good points. And so I don't think anyone on the team, myself or Alex, my co-founder, or Neil, the community manager, like we definitely don't like dismiss anything that they put forward, because I think a lot of times the problems they're calling out are real problems. I sometimes disagree with the proposed solutions. I think some of the solutions they propose won't actually do what they think they'll do, but it's kind of a separate. That's why we debate, and so yeah. I mean, as a team, we try to keep our efforts focused on like the few things that like we as a team have control over, and then like particularly the things that we can do that the ecosystem can't. So these are like changes to the core contract design itself, core incentives, things to the main website, and like those distribution channels, because those are the things that we have leverage over that like the ecosystem can't. But there are many things that like get proposed by the community that people can do without our permission. Like we don't need to be involved in a lot of this stuff, and so as much as we can, we try to encourage the ecosystem just to like go do stuff, and if it works, it works. But yeah, we try to, I guess, circling back to your points, like I think both factions are there. And then everyone, I think, is in the utility camp of like, what is the utility, when utility? And on that front, the main thing we're kind of focused on right now is liquidity, is kind of the primary North Star that we're focused on. And the short kind of like thought process there is just that, like, if ore is to become money, let's say, quote unquote money, it needs to be exchangeable for real world things, right? It's like, obviously. and so it's like, what are the real world things on Solana? And luckily there are actually quite a few. There's elements, obviously, and I think we'll have
shameless plug.
Yeah.
oil and ore, baby. Oil and ore.
Yeah. Tokenized oil. I mean, any sort of tokenized commodities, tokenized gold, tokenized US treasuries, obviously stables, sort of tokenized real world assets. And then all of DePIN as well. You have like Helium Mobile credits, you have Cusco credits, which it's my understanding will soon be a token. You have Honey from like Hive Mapper, like mapping data credits, Render for like GPU credits, and just a whole bunch of like long tail of sort of DePIN credit tokens, which we view as like real world assets in a way as well. And what we want to do is basically get ore into position where it has deep liquidity with all of those assets, basically. So like really deep liquidity with ore and Elements token, and deep liquidity with ore and mobile, like Helium Mobile, and deep liquidity with like ore and USDC, obviously, but all of these different tokens. And then what ore kind of becomes is this like central hub in a liquidity network, if you will, where if you're moving between those real world assets, the ore pools will have the deepest liquidity and offer the best price and the lowest slippage. And then functionally, like that is what money is like this asset that gives you very low slippage moving between all these real world assets. And so to get that liquidity, we need incentives. It doesn't just happen by goodwill. And so we've been the last month and a half or so, we've spent a bit of time sort of working out these incentives of how they'll work. And coming up soon in the next few days, basically, we'll be starting to roll this out and starting to experiment and see how much like liquidity we can start to drive between ore and these various like RWA markets.
That's fascinating.
Cool. I love the mission there too. It's like using sort of, I guess, ore as a platform in a way where it's like with your initial goal of making it just accessible to quite literally everyone as like the initial mission. And then it's expanding the accessibility across the rest of the ecosystem wherever it makes sense and ties together well. This episode probably will get published in like a week and a half. Is there any sort of stuff that you're interested or able to talk about now that sort of will be live and public then?
The big thing we'll have launched these incentives. So we call them boosts, basically. And the way they work is that we are adding this staking layer on top of the mining. So if you basically stake various tokens, and there'll be a list of like, you can stake this token and it will earn this multiplier. And we'll, as a team, maintain this moderated list of which tokens are able to be staked and for which multipliers. And we'll be setting up multipliers for all sorts of LP tokens. And so the basic model is you have proof of work mining and a proof of stake multiplier. And if you're staking, then you'll earn a multiplier on your mining rewards. And then the big thing that is kind of spent the reason this has actually taken so long to build is we also have kind of been working on like this pool infrastructure as well, because like a lot of the miners want to it's much more efficient for them to participate in a mining pool as opposed to just working on their own. And so there's kind of this intersection between the staking multipliers and the pools that is rather interesting, because it kind of the pools act as this like meeting point between, you get like an army of miners, like, a few hundred miners with laptops and stuff, and like large liquidity providers who just have like a ton of capital that they want to deploy and not a lot of hash power. And the pools are that meeting point where these two parties can kind of come together and split those rewards. And so it's like trying to create those tools for pool operators to be able to spin up pools and focus on certain boosts and certain multipliers over others is what we've primarily just been trying to polish out over the last few weeks or so. But all of this, should be live by the time this episode airs. And we'll have a few of these multipliers live, for folks to start earning more ore with. So
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's actually really interesting, because I feel like most tokens are not ecosystem wide. I guess what I mean by that is like most tokens are designed to provide utility for a specific community.
To just themselves, basically. They're not trying to broaden the ecosystem.
Exactly. And you're sort of suggesting, hey, let's create a token that, rather than being like a, it's almost like instead of it being vertically integrated, it's horizontally integrated. So it's like this can be beneficial ecosystem wide on sort of this layer, the liquidity layer, versus what I think a lot of people do, which is let's create a token, like the Jupe or Jito tokens, those kinds of things. It's like they serve the Jupiter vertical within the ecosystem, or the Jito layer within the ecosystem. I haven't really. Do you guys know of any other examples that kind of do this more like horizontal, aside from the native token of a blockchain?
I'd say maybe the closest thing is like, ETH on all the various L2s. It's like the unit of account token that gets used.
I think maybe Sanctum is maybe like the closest thing that I can think of, where it's liquid staking, but it's like a common liquid staking layer, so they're all effectively the same. But that's still effectively in one vertical of staking. But that's probably the closest example I can think of, at least on Solana.
Yeah. I mean, our pitch to RWA teams basically is like we can, if you have some tokenized commodity or deep in credit token, like we can help bring liquidity. And I think this pitch will get stronger as that network grows.
Mm-hmm. The network effects.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right now it's like, just we have a Sol and like USDC pool, but like as we start to build out more of these, then there's deeper liquidity for ore, and we can help sort of bring that liquidity network to any new like RWA token that's launching on Solana, and try to connect it into the network. And everyone we've talked to about this, they seem to get it. Like it's like, why would I not want more liquidity? Like sure. I think it will be interesting to watch play out. Like the big question in our minds right now is like we've modeled a lot of this stuff and it works in the models, but it's yet to be seen how much liquidity the boosts drive. And like we'll need to basically measure like, okay, if we add a 4x to like or mobile, let's say, how much liquidity does that bring to the markets? And then if we change that to an 8x, how much more does that bring? And if we change to a 16x, how much more does that bring? And so we start to see these curves of like, for various multipliers, how much liquidity is that really going to bring? And then we start to get a better like quantifiable model for a lot of this stuff. But
so I very clearly see the benefit to, right, like mobile, for example, and in this scenario, I see the benefit to the miners for getting like a boost on their mining for having staked. What is the benefit to the broader or not just the ore miner, but like the broader ore system, I guess. Yeah. So like, what does ore get in return for driving liquidity to, these real world asset tokens?
Yeah. The big thing is like, one, this like defensible position of like, what if you ask like what makes ore unique right now, the main answer is the mining components. And if we were to stop mining today, which like some people in the community want us to, but I don't think is the right move, then like there isn't really that much difference between like ore and any sort of, pump fund meme coin that's like made its radium. They're just like a fixed supply token with a brand. And like what makes one asset different than another, at least in our view, is like the liquidity that is backing it. And I think there's a whole argument. I've kind of been working on this blog post for a little bit, but like this whole argument to be made that like store value in some ways just is liquidity. It's like store value means that like, in the barest of bear markets, when everyone was at max panic, was there still liquidity for your asset? Could you still trade it? And like, was there still demand for it? And so in our view, like liquidity is everything. And then we primarily just want to create this like very diverse network of liquidity where it's not just like or Sol, but it's or Sol or USDC or Elements or Mobile or Render, etc. And then if you build that network, that's like a very kind of unique value prop in a way where it's like, or is this rather unique asset that allows you to get between all these different tokens with minimal slippage. And I think if we do that, then the value that sort of comes like, I've talked to like so many folks who ask like how to buy ore in size, and like right now you can't because there's so little liquidity in the markets. But if we can bring a lot more liquidity, it starts to look a lot more appealing for like a lot of folks who say want to like buy a fair number of tokens and just hold them, maybe for this store value narrative. Because if you have this guaranteed liquidity that's always going to be there through a bear market to like through cycles, then that's appealing for a lot of reasons.
That is really interesting. It's like I think one of my criticisms maybe of the crypto community, and obviously not the whole community, not everybody thinks this, but there is sort of this like tear down the financial system and like we'll build something new type of mentality that, while sometimes I agree with the sentiment, right? Like ideologically, there's sort of like a pragmatism that's missing when people are just like, well, let's get rid of central banks altogether. It's like, well, actually, the central bank serves many, many, many different functions that you never think about in your daily life, and you don't have to because it's solved for you. One of which is like liquidity, right? Like think about USD and the liquidity it provides. And it's like you never have to worry about whether USD is going to be accepted when you go to the store or whatever, right? So much so that like USD is highly liquid across the world, not only just in the US. And so it's interesting to hear you talking about liquidity sort of as almost a synonym with store of value, because it's like, oh yeah, that actually kind of does make sense. That is a huge portion here. And it's interesting because I might be reevaluating my stance on how much of the financial system we can rebuild if like there are people like you who are thinking about it at like this very base layer of like, well, hey, this liquidity piece is one of the granular functions that is served by, for example, a central bank. We actually might be able to rebuild that in a decentralized manner. And I'd not considered that before. And so it is like, I am incredibly interested to see how it plays out. Both because I'm a nerd and curious, and also a speculator and hold ore, and because like the utility seems really cool and changes my tune on like what functions can we replace with crypto.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely am not the doomer, and I think if like if we find ourselves in a world where like the dollar is worthless, like we're gonna have so many other problems. Like I definitely do not really want to position ore as like this replacement for the dollar, because I don't think it is. Like I think fiat currencies will always be here to a degree. There's always going to be an incentive for governments to issue their own currencies and work with banks to do that. Um, my kind of main philosophical stance is just that these blockchains allow us to create alternative kind of what am I call like state-free currencies where your monetary policy is not governed by a board of directors, but is governed by computer code. And just as an alternative, like it's like I believe in the free markets. Like we should have alternatives. So I think Bitcoin obviously was like the first one that really pioneered this approach. It's like we have this programmatic monetary policy of 21 million tokens, and we have this sort of halving function of how we get from 0 to 21 million. And the idea that we can like replace this board of bankers that will manage the monetary policy with computer code is like a really, really powerful idea. And like that, there's a lot of room for flexibility and there's just a lot of room for experimentation, I guess, in that space. And ore is just, I think, one of many, many experiments. I just kind of believe in like the free market. Like we should have competition, not to replace the Federal Reserve, but simply to compete. So that's sort of what ore is meant to be. And I think we can compete, particularly in this like, economic zone of Solana. Because there's just stuff like we're native to that Solana system, and I think there's certain things we can bake into the token that the Federal Reserve is not going to bake into the dollar. That gives ore an advantage, particularly in this Solana economic sort of space. That doesn't mean that ore will be like a reserve currency for governments around the world, but in Solana it will serve a purpose. And
it's optionality. Providing people with ultimate optionality. They can sort of make an educated decision based off whatever their stance is on real world things, digital things, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really cool. Really cool. Well, I'm bullish. I am, very curious to like see how the ore experiment plays out long term. I've loved sort of watching how it's evolved just over the last, I don't know how many months, 4 months, 5 months, like since the initial launch. It's already got so much mind share in the Solana ecosystem after such a short time, which I think is awesome, and goes to show that like you've definitely struck a nerve somewhere in a positive way, right? Like people are engaged and interested, and I think that's awesome. I want to make sure, like as we wrap up here, that if there's any last minute things you want to say to our listeners, you get the chance to say it. Like maybe how people can get involved and engaged with the ore ecosystem across, whether it's mining or just jumping in the Discord and debating different things. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big things. Easiest way to get involved is just like follow Ore Supply on Twitter. My account is HardhatChad. From there, we have links to the website where anyone can start mining. You just connect a Solana wallet, create an account, and you can start mining from your browser. If you want to get sort of more performance out of your machine, we offer a CLI, like a command line interface that is like pretty easy to install and get started. And then, if you need any help getting through that, the Discord links are there on the landing page. And there's a very active community in Discord that is there to answer questions and help debug and resolve issues. Highly recommend joining a mining pool. I think Eclipse there's a pool in the OR ecosystem called Eclipse. They've been here since day one, and they've done a great job of like pioneering a lot of this pool stuff. And yeah, I've talked to them a number of times and just can't recommend them highly enough. They're super great.
Nice. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We'll have to do it again soon because things change so rapidly that we'll want to have you on to discuss, the changes over the next few months even and the results of the liquidity experiment. So let's do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
To the listeners, we will see you all next time.
Bye-bye. All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Solfate podcast. I hope you liked it. I know we did. We always have a blast recording with our amazing guests. If you've got a moment, please leave us a review in your podcast app or subscribe on YouTube. And I guess it's time to get some more coffee and get back to work.